So I wanted to do this one video today. I know it's been a little sparse the past few weeks. Been pretty busy, but I have a little bit of time before I hit the road today. So I did want to talk about the new Brexit deal between the UK and the European Union and what it means in terms of both the British politics and our own political situation here in the United States. So it goes without saying that the past few years have been pretty tumultuous in both our countries, the US and the UK. And I hope that the Brexit deal is a harbinger of something that will be sort of a departure from the current track that I do see around the world of countries basically subsuming themselves to larger multi or transnational bodies. Okay, and there have been other breaks with the trend, especially in Brazil, especially in other parts of South America and Central America, and hopefully soon in parts of Europe as well. The thing I want you to do first is, of course, to subscribe to me either on BitChute if you're watching on BitChute, on Odyssey, on Rumble, or on YouTube if you're still on YouTube. But I would encourage you to go to one of the three other options, Rumble, Odyssey, or BitChute, and subscribe there so that you get notifications for new videos. Or you can also subscribe to me at Razor Sharp News Reports. I typically have a um, a newsletter every few weeks now. I haven't been posting nearly as often as I wanted to, but at the most it would be weekly. In any case, you can see that the British Brexit deal, or sorry, the bill in the British Parliament concluding the trade deal between the UK and the European Union is already through. And I think it might have to pass. Okay, yeah, it did pass the House of Lords, meaning that the bill is essentially law now, and people are going to have to cope with that. Those who have been opposed to Brexit, they're going to have to cope with the reality, which is all the doom and gloom, all of the different complaints that were being lodged against Brexit from before it was voted upon in 2016 have been false. And we're going to be talking a little bit about, hopefully not too long, but a little bit about what that means in terms of both the evolution of the British politics as well as American politics. So we have to remember in 2016 there was both the U.S. election that brought in Donald Trump. Of course, now appears as if if nothing extreme happens, Donald Trump will be leaving the White House this year, or actually technically next year, but in the next few weeks. In any case, we are seeing. So that was something that happened the same year as Brexit, but the process was not the same. And but there are certain common threads between them. So to trace it to the beginning of the Brexit process, there was a thing called the Eurosceptic Tendency in the UK for many, many years before Brexit happened. I think it was even since the 90s. It's one of the reasons that the British never entered the common currency, the euro, and it's also one of the reasons that they've always been seen as, in some sense, a separate but participating partner within the EU. While most of the other partners are, as you would see, full partners, the British have been a little bit at arm's length because of the currency difference. And it really began to pick up speed in the 2010s. And one of the reasons for that was the ties between the ruling Labour Party and the Eurocentric leadership, the elite Eurocentric uh, element within British politics. People like Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, people like um, Lord Adonis. I think he's a lord now. I believe at the time he wasn't. and people like Vince Cable and Tony Blair. So those are names that if you're from Britain, you'll definitely be familiar with. If you're not, if you're from the U.S., you might only know Tony Blair among them. But many of them started to speak as if, well, we are looking at our role as not really being representative of the British public, but really of a new European nation. And the priorities of of our job will be to serve the needs of Europe as opposed to uh, just Britain proper, right? And in 2010, this led to the fall of the Labour government in that election. It was, here we go. So there was the 2010 UK general election, which was the end of about, what was it, 13 years of Labour Party rule, and David Cameron came into power. The problem was that Cameron, first of all, as a conservative, he was part of the more establishment faction of the Conservative Party. He was a Europhile. He wanted the British government to sort of renegotiate its role within the EU and help to, I guess, make it a more palatable fit, something that would, I guess, assuage some of the concerns of Eurosceptics without leading the British out of the EU. The problem was that in 2010 he didn't get a majority. So for the first time, the British had to have a coalition government between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. And the irony is that the Liberal Democrats are the most pro-European party in Britain. They wanted more integration. They wanted the UK to be basically inseparable from the EU. And I believe in some parts of the Liberal Democrat Party, there actually was, what you would call a hope to literally integrate it within the EU in terms of currency, in terms of the possibility of a European army one day. So basically, there was this coalition government for about 5 years. After that, there was the 2015 election, and the conservatives knew that in order to actually gain a majority, they would need to, promise to their Eurosceptic base, the people who are the bread and butter of the conservative voting public, they needed to promise them at least a chance that the membership of the EU would come up for a vote, because in the previous years, several of these referendums on EU treaties had been rejected, notably in Ireland and I think in Portugal. They had been rejected, and then the EU forced the countries that were voting on the treaties, which were just expansions of EU power. They weren't even on membership in the EU. So they were forced to relitigate those treaties in new referenda and to vote for them. So that was the reason that the Eurosceptics, people like Nigel Farage and the UK Independence Party at the time, they were pushing for a full referendum on membership in the EU. In the meantime, the Scottish National Party was pushing for a referendum on whether Scotland would be independent. And both of them got their wish. So in 2015, the Conservatives won a full, they won a full majority, and that led to a Scottish independence Actually, it followed a Scottish independence referendum, so I have it out of order. The Scottish independence referendum of 2014 was a loss for the Scottish nationalists, but they saw an increase of their support in terms of their parliamentary representation. The Conservatives, having already held a referendum in Scotland, having already governed for about 5 years, and now having seen that their coalition with the Liberal Democrats was not really a way to have a consistent government, they saw a surge in support that got them above a majority. So David Cameron now had to deliver on his promise of a referendum. But this is important. Promising the referendum was not the same as supporting leaving the EU. So David Cameron he remained, if you will, he was the equivalent of what we in the U.S. would call a Bush Republican, an establishment Republican, one who sold a conservatism that was for the people who are the investment class, people who are professionals, more highly educated people, and in Britain, of course, the traditional upper class, people who actually have titles in some cases, or people who are involved in the City of London. The City of London is the financial center of the British, the United Kingdom, and the British society. So that was really one of the main, uh, one of the main sticking points of the election that he needed in order to win. He had to deliver on now the EU referendum, but he had no desire to actually have the EU um, have the UK leave the EU. So then in 2016, he finally delivered the referendum, and he campaigned actively to have the UK remain in the EU. So there were two sides: leave or remain. Remain obviously meaning to stay in the EU. Leave meaning to break the bond with the EU, to rupture the membership of the EU. And what actually ended up happening was that there was a clear majority to leave, but it was sort of centralized in two parts of the UK, in Wales and England. In Northern Ireland and in Scotland, it actually wasn't too popular, and in fact, I believe in Scotland it lost by a pretty wide margin. And also in London itself, the, it was actually pretty unpopular. However, the reason that it did succeed was because in some of the more populated but underprivileged parts of the European Union, the northern industrial towns, places I believe like Bolton and Birmingham and Manchester, it was actually pretty popular, and it won by rather large margins. You can actually see that the main focus of the EU leave side, the main power center, I should say, was in some of these coastal towns, areas affected by EU fishing. You would have French fishermen and I think Spanish fishermen as well going into Europe, into British waters, and uh, just you know just taking the fish, and they could do it legally, right? They could fish in UK waters, and the British fishermen had no claim legally or in any other sense to force them to return to their waters. So what happened as a result of this? It was the biggest political revolution in British history, in the modern, or at least in the modern history, right? Excluding maybe the 1600s or the Act of Union and things like that. But the British then saw their Prime Minister, David Cameron, he resigned. He was like, well, I said that I would resign the if the referendum resulted in a leave vote. I am going to resign, and that led to Theresa May. Theresa May is an important figure in terms of this discussion because by this time the British had very clear and very polarized visions in terms of their political leadership. They had Theresa May. She succeeded David Cameron thanks to a very uh, you know, I'm not going to say rigged because it is the system that they have, but a very unrepresentative system of choosing leaders. She comes into power because basically the conservative membership had decided, yeah, we're going to have her. We're not going to have. I think the other candidate was Andrea Leadsom, and she was forced to withdraw for a very petty reason resulting from some comment she made. So Theresa May became the prime minister. She wasn't even really elected the leader of the Conservative Party, much less the prime minister of the UK. So her opponent in 27. So first of all, she was a Remainer. She was somebody like David Cameron who had campaigned to remain in the EU. She said that she accepted the result of the EU referendum for leave, but she was largely committed, at least publicly, to leaving the EU, even if there was no deal, because no deal was better than a bad deal. That's what she campaigned on for much of her tenure. But in reality, you saw time after time when there was an opportunity for her to put her foot down and tell the EU that she was going to, make a clean break, she didn't do it. So in 2017, when there was a snap election, she said she needed a mandate, an actual electoral mandate, less than a year after she took office. Basically, she was um, facing Jeremy Corbyn, who we've done a few videos on this channel, and Corbyn basically represented the more ideological side of the Labour Party, right? He was a staunch socialist. In some case, he even wrote for the Morning Star, a communist party newspaper in Britain. And Jeremy Corbyn basically offered a competing vision. And the other thing that Jeremy Corbyn did was that he provided a rallying point. This is something that's very unusual, despite the fact that for many years Jeremy Corbyn had presented himself as a Euroskeptic, as someone who thought the EU would be bad for workers and bad for wages and bad for the poor. He now said, "Well, we're going to have to, negotiate a deal that would be fair for workers and remain within the European Common Market and all of these other things." And a lot of his rhetoric was telling the Remainers, or the Ramoners, as they were called, people who hadn't accepted the result of the 2016 referendum, and also people who, in many cases, I should say, were saying, yeah, the referendum was rigged. It was the result of Russian meddling. It was the result of all sorts of cheating. It was the result of all sorts of financial shenanigans by the Leave campaign. A lot of those people flocked to Jeremy Corbyn, thinking that he would keep the UK within the European Union. And Theresa May basically botched the job. She lost the majority that David Cameron had, and the UK was left with a government that was hanging basically on a conservative minority government with support from the Democratic Unionist Party, which means that, so the Democratic Unionist Party, for those who don't know, is a narrow party over only in Northern Ireland. It's the Northern Ireland Protestant Party, and they are more Eurosceptic than the rest of the Irish parties in Northern Ireland. So basically, it was the UK, uh, being governed by Theresa May and her weak conservative government. So the other thing that ended up happening was that Theresa May was now having to she was having to negotiate and go back and forth to Britain and show that she was bringing something back from these negotiations, and it just wasn't happening. And over again, people were looking at these deals and saying, "This isn't really what we voted for, and we are ready to, be done with you, Theresa May. You seem to be basically dragging your feet and making excuses and all of that." So in 2019, in the summer of 2019, and this is, remember, so the referendum that happened in 2016. This is what I'm getting at. The long road seemed to be getting longer and longer. So this is for those of you here in the U.S. who are, what's going to happen right now. Our road is getting longer, but I think we still have to keep going on that road. In any case, so she had lengthened the road by 2 years, actually 3 years if you think about that. She became leader in 2016 after Cameron resigned, and she had to resign in 2019. And Boris Johnson ends up becoming the leader of the Conservative Party. And Johnson was saying, look, I don't care what the media is saying. I don't care what the other elements of the Conservative Party are saying. I'm going to take the UK out of the EU with a deal or without a deal. He had to go through a lot of different um, legal challenges to it. And in fact, a major part of the Conservative Party rejected his mandates to force the UK to actually go through with Brexit, and some of them were kicked out of the Conservative Party. This is what's called withdrawing the whip. So these are people like Anna Soubry. These are people who were Conservative Party members for most of their career, and they had remained ardent supporters of the Remain, they've been saying, oh yeah, we can overturn Brexit. We don't have to listen to the mandate of the electorate. We're going to just, reject any deal and keep the UK within the EU as long as it takes, and force extensions of the negotiation process. So eventually, what happened was that Johnson kept challenging Jeremy Corbyn and challenging other members of the opposition to give him a vote of no confidence. And he wanted to prorogue Parliament and to dissolve the government and do all these other uh, parliamentary motions in order to force a new election. And he did. Eventually, Jeremy Corbyn did have to yield and agree to a new election, because otherwise it would seem, and this was something that was hurting them in the polls, it would begin to seem that the Labour Party knew that in a new election they would lose by a major margin, by a large margin, because the Labour Party still hadn't sorted out how they would um, manage the Brexit process. In the end, once the election season had actually begun, but even before that, Jeremy Corbyn was saying that he would negotiate. This is one of the funniest parts of it. This is why he was a failure as a leader, and this is why, in many cases, I think some of the people who are leading the country here now in the U.S., especially on the Democratic side, they're becoming losers. He was basically saying, "I will negotiate a deal, and then we will have a second referendum, and then I'm not going to campaign for or against it. I'm basically going to remain neutral." So he said he was going to campaign for a deal that he wouldn't even support explicitly in the referendum. He would leave the choice up to the people to support or reject a deal that he had negotiated without endorsing it. That's why Jeremy Corbyn was a failure. That's why Boris Johnson won the 2019 election. He was very clear on what he would do, and he said, we are going to leave the EU, and that's what he did. And yeah, I would say that it's been a long and rocky road for the British people and for the Brexit process, but we're actually, I wouldn't say it's the end, but it is uh, the it's a clear turning point that within, I guess, I think it's in the next couple of days, this deal will be official, and there will be no formal ties between the UK and the EU in terms of government. And in fact, once the election concluded in 2019, um, the UK actually did leave the EU, but you have to remember there was um, there was this sort of period when they were still subject to EU trading guidelines and rules. That's coming to an end tomorrow or so. And another thing that I wanted to add before moving back to what that means for us here in the U.S. is that when Theresa May was prime minister, one of the reasons that she was brought down, one of the reasons that populist action did torpedo her premiership, was that there was an EU election, and people were saying, why are we still in the EU even? We need to actually leave. And she's not doing anything for it. So Nigel Farage founded the Brexit Party and won within 6 weeks a victory. With a new party, he won the vast majority of the seats in the EU election, the EU parliamentary election. And that was a major reason that the Conservatives dumped Theresa May and she had to resign. It was pretty clear that without actually concluding the Brexit negotiations and bringing a deal home, she would have no popular mandate anymore. In a new election, the Conservatives would probably have fallen and lost many more seats. In fact, she lost seats in local elections, I believe, for 2 straight years. So that was one of the major turning points. There was a populist revolution in terms of British politics after Brexit as well, in terms of the Brexit Party and forcing the Conservatives to actually do something. And that's one of the reasons that Johnson ended up getting the chance and getting his, he ended up campaigning to leave the EU in 2019 and winning, and even forcing the Brexit Party to go along with him. Um, What's that mean in terms of here? All of these different stages. You saw if you will, um, Tony Blair was the same type of politician as an Obama or Bill Clinton, a very centrist, very elitist person, nominally popular, and Gordon Brown, his successor, was a very plain person. But in any case, when they lost in 2010, you did get a person who was supposedly a conservative. Uh, in David Cameron, he would be sort of the Bush type, so it's a little bit of a different order than it was here. Then, when Cameron proved to be insufficient in order to fulfill the track that the people were going down, which was Brexit, which was breaking with the EU, they brought in someone like, first of all, they had to dump him after the referendum, and they again had to go through another dud, Theresa May. Eventually, they got someone like Boris Johnson. Now, Boris Johnson is proving to be, I guess, what would you call it? He's also compromising too much and defying popular will by doing these lockdowns, right? These lockdowns in Britain, which are even more draconian than they are in the U.S. So you've had to go through several cycles, going from the Labour Party, which was under Blair and Gordon Brown, very Eurocentric and very elitist. You had to go to the Conservative Party, which is in other ways it's very Eurocentric and elitist, and peel away several layers of that and get someone like Johnson, who is a little bit, not too much, but he's a little bit more towards the populist sentiment. And eventually, I believe that Britain will become a much more populist country in terms of its leadership. There's going to probably have to be a little bit more like electoral reform for that to happen. But I think that this whole lockdown situation, I think that a lot of these other issues that are coming up and some of the problems that are in the EU Brexit deal are going to lead to another stage. That's exactly what I think is going to happen here. We saw Donald Trump come into office. There was a lot of hope from people who wanted to see immigration reform, and meaning that they, for less immigration, building the wall. There were a lot of people who wanted new trade deals. And to be fair, I think Donald Trump got a lot more accomplished in 4 years than a lot of these British leaders did in all those years. What accomplishments can David Cameron and Theresa May point to? Not very much. Boris Johnson also is, I would say, he's only a mediocre leader. Yes, he did get Brexit done, and yes, he is ending freedom of movement and a lot of these other elements of immigration policy that were hindering the UK for all those years that it was part of the EU. He's ending a lot of those things. I think he's pushing back on the BBC and things like that. But he's nowhere near the revolutionary leader that Donald Trump was. But we still are seeing that Donald Trump isn't enough, and this is like the main message I want to bring here. For those of you that are counting on some major upheaval, which will overturn the 2020 election and keep Donald Trump in power, I don't know if you can count on that. I doubt it. I personally am very skeptical. I've accepted that even though I don't trust the results of the 2020 election, the system has basically been built so that you can't litigate it successfully. The courts don't want to touch it. The courts are rejecting the people's will, and they're rejecting also. It's not just populism, because if in all fairness, I am not a populist myself. I'm a libertarian. But beyond just populism, they're rejecting the actual function that they have within the system, which is to adjudicate cases pertaining to the law. So they won't look at electoral fraud. They won't look at many of these constitutional issues in terms of mail-in ballots and in terms of qualifications and voter ID anymore. And for many years they would, right? There have been many cases that have gone to the courts concerning voter ID for many years in state courts, places like New Hampshire and I think in New Jersey as well. So those are issues that for many years the courts were willing to litigate, and now they're saying, well, no, you don't have any standing and things like that. So that is really a problem that we're encountering here. That there were issues like that in the UK, but we have it much worse because it goes state by state, and we have a much more cumbersome judicial system than there because there's more courts and there's more levels, right? So we have courts that are going all the way from the municipal level all the way up to the Supreme Court. So what we're looking at is a system where we have to find our own path back to rejecting the people who won't abide by the electoral will. And it's going to be pretty rough and painful, but we already see some of the things that we need to do. The first thing, which is something that I talk about a lot, is to punish corporations through the purse, right? So you don't want to support corporations that don't that first of all that discriminate against your belief system, right? So you should try to fight back against that. And I usually talk about that in the context of technology, where you should try to move to alternative tech platforms. And I'll talk about that more at a different time. Another thing you want to do is look at the primaries whenever they're happening. I don't know if there's going to be a new populist party for the former Trump movement or the current Trump movement, because he might run again in 2024. But in any case, if there is not one and there are Republican primaries in 2022, you definitely want to register and vote in them and vote out the people that are deemed to be, you know, collaborators with the current system, meaning people. So, for example, the best person to illustrate that is Adam Kinzinger, who is a congressman from Illinois, a Republican congressman, who's basically been saying, "Oh, the election's over. Donald Trump is a baby. He's complaining. Let's move on. Uh, you know, Biden won fair and square, right?" So these are people who they expect people to just sit in the corner and shut up and accept that these are your elected leaders and you don't have a right to question anything that not just anything that they're doing, but literally how they got elected. That's one of the central issues of governance. If the person doing the governing is illegitimately seated, then that person can continue to do even worse abuses. These are things that you've seen kings in past societies that are seated illegitimately, that go on to abuse people. This was very common in the Roman Empire, right? That you would have emperors that would come to power by murdering the previous emperor. So that's basically his premise, right? So you go to Adam Kinzinger, you go to the other Republican losers that are, going ahead with this and saying, yeah, we agree that Joe Biden is the president. Why? Because the media said so, and because, um, you know, because we don't believe that electoral fraud happened, and we don't want any investigation or anything. You go to them and you say, look, we are going to support your opponent. You're going to basically be going home. You don't have any base of support, and your claim to your post, which is as a congressman and as a person who affects our governance at that level through the legislature, you're going to be basically a no one after this, right? So you elect people who are basically uh, within the primary system, they're closer to your views. Uh, this is again, this is if the Republican Party doesn't split in two, which could very well happen in the future. Things like that have been spoken about before. Yeah, you have to punish people like Adam Kinzinger. You have to put, more important than Kinzinger, who's in Congress. You have to do it at the state level and at the county level. You have to. There's people, Brian Kemp of Georgia, and I think Jeff Duncan is his lieutenant governor. Those people have to be primaried out. People in and more importantly, in primaries in states where there are no Republican governors or lieutenant governors or secretaries of state, you have to go and vote in the primary for the Republican candidate and basically try to create a movement there. It has to happen on the local level first. in places like Michigan and Wisconsin, and that will probably force the hand of the federal government in the meantime, because when they get pushback from the states, they get a little bit more jelly need. Some of these leaders, people like Joe Biden's already what'd you say, jelly brained, so it doesn't really make a difference in terms of him. But yeah, I believe Kamala Harris, if she gets too much pushback on the state level, she will be a little less. She's not a strong person in terms of her, mental fortitude. I think she would crumble in many cases. And yeah, if you live in Georgia and you are not planning to vote next week, I think it might. I think at least you want to give a chance to win the Senate next week. Okay. I know it's not an easy pill to swallow, but I think it's slightly more preferable to have the Senate in Republican hands than it is to have all three branches of government in Democratic hands. So that's about it. I do have to go. In fact, I think we're supposed to go already, but please like, share, and subscribe. Also, I want to remind you to to subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to me on Odyssey, and subscribe to me on BitChute and Rumble. And I will talk to you later.